So I got interested in investor-state dispute settlement when I was really doing trade law. And trade law is probably the dominant pillar of international economic law. And years ago, investment law was a much smaller element. And an older academic said to me, well, investment is really the future. That's going to be a much bigger issue. And that was about, 2005 or something like that. And the WTO, which of course is the trade organization, that seems to have had so many troubles in the last decade or so that as an area of academic study, it's been interesting, but there's maybe less interest from students. It's a much more niche area of practice than investment law is. So I've turned my attention to investment law, bilateral investment treaties, which were not terribly well understood, let's say 20 years ago, and the International Center for the Settlement of Investment Disputes, ICSID, which is the chief enforcement mechanism of it. So I thought, oh, that's an interesting area of international law. And I can't claim to have discovered it, but when I started looking at it, there weren't many people that had looked at it. And they were really looking at it sort of as an offshoot of trade and the WTO universe, which had been much more popular, I would say, coming out of the 1990s. But the BITs that I speak of, they've really been around since the 60s, 70s. And they exploded into prominence into the 1990s. And that was really when the arbitral jurisprudence, the case law coming out of these treaties in the ISDS tribunals really took off. And then that became an area of study for international law at that point.
And why are they so important? Like, what's the matter? Like, why are so many people, arguing against them, that they are unfair, not ethical, or whatever? Like, what's the importance?
So I think when you say them, you're probably referring to the treaties, and I think you're right to do so. Why are they needed? Hugely contentious, but they're premised on a link between the existence of a treaty and an increase in foreign direct investment flows into the countries that signed them. It's a tenuous link. It's been studied extensively in various different ways of sort of manipulating the data. And many have said there is no link. I would argue that, and this is based on the trends that I've observed and conversations I've had with multinational businesses, that the treaties do placate investors. It makes them feel safer in countries that are high risk. It makes them feel safer that the assets that they invest in high risk countries will not be seized indiscriminately. And a point that I give as an example that's been made to me many times when I've met business people, if you take an extractive sector company like a mine, it'll be 20 years before that mine produces a profit. So that's 20 years of time of sunk costs that you're committing to that country, and to then suddenly have it expropriated because there's been a change in the government or there's been a revolution or something like that is really quite unfair. So by making investors feel safer, you will then in theory stimulate foreign direct investment, and that is economically valuable because it diverts resources to where they're more profitably used, and added benefits like training, employment, tax revenues for developing countries, and so on. So I would see that the bilateral investment treaty as central to the sort of the developmental project of the 21st century, and really sort of a key component of economic globalization. That would be my standpoint.